Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to Raise Your Hand Texas House District 45 Candidate Forum. My name is Mario Pina, and I'm the Regional Advocacy Director for the Greater Austin area. The future of Texas, our economy, communities, and citizenry depends on how well we prepare our students today. All students deserve a level playing field and equal access to quality public education, as I'm sure you all agree. We believe our public schools represent our greatest hope for educating and preparing all over 5 million Texas students for the future. If you haven't heard about Raise Your Hand Texas, I want to give you a little bit of information about it. Raise Your Hand Texas is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that was founded 18 years ago to advance public education. We are coordinating a series of candidate forums across Texas in both the weeks leading up to our March 5th election. As a reminder, Raise Your Hand Texas does not endorse candidates, and we do provide opportunities like tonight's event to help voters learn more about the candidates on their ballot before they go to the voting polls. We would like to thank you for taking the time to join us and to learn more about what the candidates have to say about public education. I would now like to introduce our moderator for tonight's forum, Matthew Watkins. Matthew is the managing editor of News and Politics, overseeing the day-to-day planning news coverage at the Texas Tribune. He began working at the Texas Tribune in 2015 and previously served as a reporter, breaking news editor, and politics editor. Thank you, Matthew, for serving as our moderator for this evening.
All right, thanks, Mario, and thank you all for having me. I'm very happy to be here, participate, and of course, a topic on a very important issue in our state. Before we begin, I'm going to start with a few kind of forum rules. If you have a phone, please silence it, of course. The goal here is, for these forums, is to create a civil environment of mutual respect in which the candidates have the opportunity to communicate clearly, and the audience members have the opportunity to learn more about both the issues and the candidates. So we've got a little bit of a list of rules here that I'm going to try to go down here quickly before we start the forum. First, the rules for our candidates here. There will be a series of questions. We ask that you please respond directly to the content matter in the question posed. And also direct your answers toward me or to the attendees. We're treating this as a forum, not a debate, right? So we're looking for, directing these questions to the people out here as opposed to engaging in, an argument on the issues or anything like that. We'll have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes to answer a question, and then at the end we'll have closing statements, also 2 minutes. If I do not feel you've clearly responded to a question, I might ask a clarification, something like that. In that case, you'll have a minute to respond. Please keep the focus on the questions, on the issues. We're asking you not to kind of talk about the other candidate, anything like that. We want to focus on kind of your ideas for public education in this issue. And also, please do not interrupt your fellow candidates when they're responding to a question. And again, let's please keep it to the 2 minutes that we have set apart. If I feel like anyone is not answering the question or following the rules around timing or cordiality, then I might step in, interrupt, redirect the conversation as appropriate. For our audience members, we ask that you please be respectful, refrain from applause or outbursts or any kind of approval or disapproval until the end of the event. The clapping will slow us down. We want to get through this, get the answers, and go from there. If there are outbursts, I might have to ask you to leave. Hopefully I won't have to do that. It seems like a nice crowd out here, so I think we'll be okay. And please, keep the campaign materials and things like that outside the forum. We welcome your tweets and social media posts from the event, and we would appreciate you tagging Raise Your Hand Texas at RYH Texas or RYHT_greater ATX. This event is being filmed and will be available on the Raise Your Hand Texas website within the next few days. Unauthorized videos are not allowed. Candidates are asked not to use the video content for their campaign purposes, aside from putting it fully on the website. Photos, you can take a photo, but please keep your camera silent, don't use a flash, don't stand up and block anyone's view, anything like that. Questions this evening focus on the issue of public education and have previously been prepared by Raise Your Hand Texas and have been provided to all the candidates. As mentioned before, candidates will be given opening remarks for 2 minutes and closing remarks for 2 minutes. Our timekeeper, Fernanda, here, an AISD teacher, has 2 pieces of paper here and will be giving warnings to the candidates as they get close. And I think that's it. So let's go ahead and get started. Our 2 candidates present tonight are running in the Democratic primary for District 45. They are State Representative Erin Zwiener, the incumbent, right here, and Chevo Pastrano, right here. So let's go ahead and kick it off with the opening remarks. Representative Zwiener, we're going to start with you, so you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm going to start by breaking one of the rules and ask you all to give yourselves a round of applause as public education voters. And I'm saying that because public education voters are perhaps the most important voters in the state of Texas right now. Voters like y'all standing up, making yourselves heard, are why we did not gut public schools in one of the 4 special sessions last year with a voucher scam. And that is far and away the most pressing issue facing our public schools right now. The fact that we have, unfortunately, leaders in Austin who are trying to break our public school system so that they can make a case for privatizing public schools is our biggest challenge. And so, as a state representative who supports our public schools, we need to be public champions for them. We need to be loud and proud about the good work they do for our students, and we need to help keep that strong public voice to protect our schools present, because the voucher fight is not over. So that's the first big challenge we have in public education. The second is that we also have leadership who treats our students like widgets. And I don't know about y'all, but I've never met any 2 kids that act the same or require the same type of education. You know, I've spent time in public schools teaching writing workshops for kids, and there wasn't a single time I taught my lesson plans the same way. And so I want to protect our public schools. I want to invest in high quality teachers so we can recruit and keep them, and I want to give them the freedom to do what they do best. And then the last thing we have to do is make sure we're supporting our students in every single way they need. That includes supporting their mental health and supporting them with their social needs so they can be successful learners.
All right, thank you, Representative. We made 2 minutes in, we already got applause. I've lost control of the room already. Just joking. Thank you very much for that. All right, Mr. Pastrano, your introduction.
Good evening, y'all. My name is Chevo Pastrano. I like to make sure that I remind people that I'm a product of Hays County Public Schools. We started out here in San Marcos. I moved to Kyle whenever I was in the middle of kindergarten, and I was a product of the Hays CISD all the way through. I attended Kyle Elementary School, Kyle Middle School, now it's called Wallace, and then Jackson Hays High School. Then I came to what was then Southwest Texas State University, and then I went to law school in Houston at South Texas College of Law. After that, we returned here, and I've had a law practice. Some of my colleagues are in the room, and I've had a law practice here since 2002. Public education is incredibly important to me. We spend a lot of our own money, our personal money, investing it back into public education where we can. For instance, one of the fights is the STAR testing. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, before the end of the night. But during STAR testing, which is a difficult time for teachers, they can't leave campus. We, on our own, go to the schools and buy them lunch for one of the days that they're doing STAR testing. We now have adopted Mendez as kind of our permanent school. We've also adopted Hernandez here in town. We also visit Tom Green when we can. Some of the other fights that I think are appropriate are school pay for teachers. Higher pay for teachers is absolutely necessary. Funding resources for children is absolutely necessary. I think in addition to the voucher fight, which we're not going to disagree about at all, but in addition to that is a fight that has to go on with regard to charter schools. We're taking money from the public school system investing it into charter schools, and there has to be a fight that goes on to prohibit that from happening or continuing to happen. In addition to that, I think that for our retired teachers, there's some talk about COLA, and we'll talk about that as well.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to go into our general questions now regarding, at first we're going to talk a little bit about the most recent legislative session, a little bit of background on that. Of course, the most recent legislative session ended up really being the most recent 5 legislative sessions with one regular and 4 special sessions. Education, of course, was a dominant issue. They talked about things in the Capitol, including teacher pay, inflationary pressures on schools, the $1.9 billion special education funding shortfall, rethinking our assessment and accountability systems, and of course, as previously mentioned, the school choice or school voucher debate, depending on your terminology. Unfortunately, these major policy issues ended up stalling and are on hold until a 5th. Well, we'll see whether there is going to be a 5th special session in 2024. That, of course, could be a possibility, as the governor would like to see a measure passed at some point on these school voucher issues. Texas entered the 2023 legislative session with historic budget surpluses. Over $33 billion was available coming into the regular session, and after funding $18 billion plus of that for property tax relief, the state still has $18 billion remaining after updated budget estimates. In addition, the legislature set aside $4 billion in the state budget for school funding and $500 million for vouchers that will remain untouched unless legislation is passed by both chambers. I'm going to start with you this time, since you went last on the introductions, Mr. Pastrano. The question is, what do you think were the biggest public education accomplishments of the regular and special sessions last year?
Zero doubt, defeating the voucher bill, right? Defeating vouchers was something that was done through a coordinated effort by the Democratic caucus, by the people who have taken the time to form relationships across the aisle and start to identify the Republicans who they could reach out to and talk to and say, hey, this voucher bill will not help your rural area of Texas that you represent. And it was through those relationships and through those conversations that particular members of the Democratic caucus were able to accomplish, that they were able to get some of the Republicans to vote against it. And defeating the voucher bill was, without question, the most important accomplishment of one of the special sessions of this past legislative session.
Representative Zwiener.
I have to agree that the most important thing we did last year is defeat Governor Abbott's voucher scam. It was an all-hands-on-deck project. There was so much pressure on the pro-public education Republicans. And they're a coalition who's existed as long as a conversation about vouchers has existed. But Governor Abbott put so much pressure and peeled several of them off. And so we as Democrats did a lot of work to bolster them. We let them lead that conversation on the floor of the Texas House. But several of us, myself included, also walked them through the procedural ways for them to have that fight effectively. However, I don't like to measure accomplishments just in things we stopped. Another thing I'm very proud of is getting funding for UT San Antonio Health Sciences Center to develop a fentanyl education curriculum. And that's something I did because I listened to parents here in Hays County who lost their kids. And they were desperate for more awareness work about fentanyl poisoning and how dangerous the counterfeit pill issue is right now. And so we got money for UT San Antonio Health Sciences Center to develop a curriculum. They're finishing that up right now, and then it'll be distributed to TEA to do a train-the-trainer program across the state. The other big accomplishment I'm proud of is that we did finally do a cost of living adjustment for our retired educators. It was long overdue, very needed. It's something we've been trying to put pressure on Republican leadership for years. In fact, during the quorum break, when we were in Washington, D.C., we actually had a town hall with congressional leaders about retired educator issues to try and put pressure on the Republicans back in Texas who were blaming us for holding up a 13th check for educators. So I'm glad we finally built up enough pressure and got that done because it was overdue.
All right, Representative, I'm going to stick with you for the next question, which is, what, in the aftermath of all those sessions, do you still feel needs major attention from the legislature?
The number one issue was funding. We have to increase the daily allotment by at least $1,000, and honestly, that number will probably be up closer to $1,500 by next legislative session. Hopefully, if we go back this year, I'm going to be a little grumpy, but there's nothing special about special sessions, y'all. Nothing good happens. But we need to increase that basic allotment so our schools have the funds to do what they need to do. Everyone in this room is familiar with inflation. Everyone in this room has gone to the grocery store and seen prices go up. And I'm really grateful that the national plan to stabilize that is working, but those costs still have gone up and they're not fundamentally going back down. Well, our schools feel those costs too. They feel it when they're fueling their school buses. They feel it when they're buying supplies, and educators feel it in their salaries. And we have seen a historic number of educators leave or consider leaving the profession. And so the number one thing we need to do for that is money, pure and simple. At a bare minimum, the state needs to keep up with the cost of living increases. And we have put cost of living adjustments on other things in Texas. We just changed the exemption level for having to pay the franchise tax in Texas. And we said that exemption level would keep going up with a cost of living adjustment. So if we can do it for who we're going to exempt from taxes, we can certainly do it for funding for our schools and tie that cost of living adjustment permanently. Tie that ADA number permanently to cost of living. The other piece I'll mention is continuing to give our schools more freedom to teach to the community they have, instead of allowing Mike Morath to try and treat our kids like widgets and standardize education across the state.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Pastrano. Same question to you. What public educations do you believe still need major attention after the legislative session?
Yeah, the number one issue, without a doubt, is teacher pay. It has been stagnant for long enough, and I think that there has to be a continuous fight to increase teacher pay. How do we do that? We do that through increasing the basic allotment. But by increasing the basic allotment, not only do we increase teacher pay, but we also increase the resources that are available and can be provided to the students and also support staff. So without a doubt, that's the starting point. But there are so many other things that need to be fought, and I think I tried to list them out in my opening. One of the things that, in addition to the voucher scam, that still I don't think is spoken enough of is funding of charter schools. And so charter schools are unregulated by the government. They're not subject to the same public information requests. They're not subject to the same public scrutiny, but we are giving billions of dollars to charter schools for money that should be reinvested back into our public schools for the children that attend public schools. A continuing fight of the voucher scam, I think that's probably a true statement that there will be some form of a voucher system proposed again. Those voucher systems don't help children like me that grew up in a working class home where our families struggled to pay for new shoes, new clothes for the first day of class. I see some of my teachers raising their head, shaking their heads. It doesn't help children like me, because if you give me $7,500 for a $10,000 tuition bill, my mom and dad didn't have $2,500 to add on for me or just one of their 3 children. It's a scam. It doesn't help anybody. And so we have to continue the fight against the voucher scam. We have to, and then the other thing before my time is out is continue raising the cost of living adjustment for retired teachers. What was given now isn't enough. It doesn't keep up with inflation.
Okay, so when vouchers were advancing in much of the sessions of last year, but especially in the 4th special session, they were contained in House Bill 1 by Chairman Buckley. The bill contained $7.5 billion for school funding, including funds for a $2,000 to $4,000 teacher pay raise. The bill also, as I said, contained a voucher provision. it was, that the vouchers were essentially contained in a significant amount of more money for schools. A vote of the House stripped that voucher provision out of the bill, which then led the bill to be withdrawn. So the question I pose, and I'll start with you, Mr. Pastrano, is what is the path forward for providing schools and teachers with additional funding under these circumstances in the legislature?
Yeah, I think that what's incredibly unique about the voucher fight was the fact that the Democratic caucus was able to reach across the aisle and identify, not get everybody to agree, but they were able to identify the select few members, enough members that come from the rural areas of Texas, that they were able to talk to them and work with them to figure out, hey, this bill does not help you guys. And I really think that that's the path forward, is continuing to develop those relationships, get those Republican members to identify that, hey, by increasing pay for the teachers of our public schools, which they benefit from in those rural areas of Texas, y'all benefit from increasing the daily allotment, increasing all these provisions that we need to support our public school children and our public school teachers. That's the path forward. It is the relationships that have been identified through the defeat of the voucher stand, is to continue to foster those relationships and to get those folks to work with us to get what we need for our public schools. That I'm totally invested in.
Representative, same question to you. What do you see as the path forward for that additional funding?
There is a probably apocryphal story about FDR, and that some civil rights leaders came and spoke to him, tried to persuade them on their issues, and he said, I agree with you. Now go make me do it. We have the votes in the legislature to improve school funding. What we do not have is enough clamoring and political will to get that vote onto the floor of the House and the Senate. Or I should say, that's what we didn't have last session. Or last 5 sessions, for that matter. And the reason we didn't have that is because, 1, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is not a friend of public education, full stop. And 2, because Governor Abbott said no more money unless you do vouchers, and met that threat, as we saw. So we couldn't get that straight vote on the House floor or on the Senate floor. We, the people of Texas, need to be loud and demanding enough on behalf of our public schools that Governor Abbott and Dan Patrick decided is in their best interest to let money move forward. And we have seen an example of this. In 2019, my first session in the legislature, that was the quote-unquote public education session. Why do y'all think it was the public education session? Because Democrats had just flipped 14 seats in the Texas legislature running on public education. And this is not a straight partisan line. I want to be clear. There are pro-public education Republicans in hard fights for their seats right now. But public education voters need to be loud. And you all live here in House District 45. If there's no traffic, I know there's always traffic, it's half an hour to the Capitol from here. So we have to be a part of that visible voice, and we have to all organize and keep the pressure on.
Just a fact check, it took me an hour and a half to get here today.
What time did you leave?
There were 2 reps in 35 Okay, so the next question is about the teacher workforce, and I'm going to start with a little bit of background before I ask the question to Representative Zwiener. Prior to the last session, Governor Abbott asked the TEA to establish a teacher vacancy task force. Texas has almost 400,000 teachers in the state, but in a recent poll from the it's called the Charles Butt Texas Teacher Statewide Poll, 75% of teachers said they were considering leaving the profession. That was a 20% increase from 3 years earlier. One of the top priorities for the next legislative session could be how our schools attract, retain, and train our teacher workforce. Representative, what do you think is the largest obstacle for schools in attracting and retaining teachers, and what can be done at the state level to fix this issue?
We've talked a lot about the money, so I'm not going to belabor that a whole bunch more, but that is number 1, is making sure that we can pay teachers like the accomplished professionals they are and we expect them to be. But there's some other issues as well, and one is that our schools have become a lightning rod for culture wars. And that is something that we have groups like Moms for Liberty actively trying to stoke. I had a teacher here in Hays County reach out to me and say, I just got a threatening email from a school administrator about checking the books on the shelves in my room. Things like that, where teachers feel like there is a target on their back, that there is somebody looking for them to mess up, also drives people out of this profession. The other thing is, I've touched on this a little bit, but teachers not having the flexibility to teach. Mike Morath, our Commissioner of Education, thinks kids are widgets, and he is trying to exercise even more control over curriculum and tell teachers not only what the objectives they're teaching to are, but exactly how to get there. And that gets in the way of good education. Another factor in that is the high stakes testing that is asking our teachers to take away time from actual meaningful education and help kids learn how to efficiently fill out a Scantron. Y'all, being good at filling out Scantrons has not done squat for me in life. That is not a useful thing. And so our teachers get demoralized by how difficult it is for them to do the work they love to do, and then we don't pay them enough, and then they become potentially in the crosshairs of a culture war attack. So us giving them more autonomy, giving them more support, and compensating them based on their skill and education is the way that we recruit and retain more educators in Texas.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pastrano. Same question. What are the largest obstacles for attracting and retaining teachers, and what can be done at the state level?
I'm going to talk about the money. Look, teachers are grossly underpaid. It's disrespectful. The amount of work that they entertain these days, the stress level that they take on these days, the added anticipated obligations that they have to consider, what they may have to take on in the future, the conversations about maybe carrying a gun. All of these things are just weighing on our teachers. And I don't know of any other way than to compensate, than to try to solve some of these problems, but by increasing their compensation. The other thing that I think about with regard to teacher compensation is that, look, at the end of the day, we trust our public schools with our children. And I talk about this all the time, is that, I remember I still drive by, my parents live a block away from Kyle Elementary School. I still remember going there. I still remember, our principal, John Kimbrough, not John Kimbrough, that's his son, Ernest Kimbrough. Ernest Kimbrough was our principal, and he would be outside waiting on us when we were dropped off. And that was the way it was back in the 80s and 90s, right? Is that you actually saw your principal at the sidewalk when you were being dropped off. And I remember these things. And the culture of schools these days is we still want our teachers to protect our children. We still leave them for more hours a day than we actually take care of our children. And we want to disrespect them with the least amount of pay possible. And so I'm going to talk about the pay. We have to increase their pay. We have to take care of our teachers the way we expect that they take care of our children.
Thank you. The next topic is school safety. School safety was one of the top priorities of the most recent legislative session, of course, in the aftermath of the shooting in Uvalde. The legislature passed during the regular session HB 2, which required at least one armed security officer to be present during regular school hours at each district campus. It also provided a funding provision that increased the existing allotment from $9.72 per student to $10 per student, and provided an additional $15,000 per campus. Mr. Pastrano, I'm going to start with you, since you answered the last question last. Have you spoken, is that right? Yes. Have you spoken with your school districts or campus principals about how this new provision is being implemented, and what else needs to be done to help keep our schools safe?
I talked earlier about some of the things that we do on a personal level to try to benefit some of the schools in this area in District 45. 2 days ago, I was at Mendez Elementary School to go visit with the teachers. We had actually planned it for an in-service day back in the winter, and it froze that day. And so when it froze, we had already paid for sandwiches, Jimmy John sandwiches, and we had to cancel it, but we'd already paid. So we said, well, we were scheduled for another day, and we thought Valentine's Day was a great day for the sandwiches to be delivered. And so as I entered, there was a gentleman that was in front of me. You have to check in, and there was a gentleman that was trying to check in, and he was angry. And I could tell he was frustrated, and the secretary was calling somebody, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But what I ended up learning was the security guy came, the armed security guy came because he was a registered sex offender trying to get into the schools. And so I got to see it in action, that it was actually working, right? For some schools, because not all schools is it working as effectively because the pay isn't sufficient to get an armed security guy and those types of things, right? It's just not sufficient where we need to be. So I think what else needs to be done? We also have to continue to have the discussion of paying qualified people. If we want somebody in that position, we have to pay them tantamount to somebody like the gentleman seated in the back here today, who is a qualified peace officer. If that's the position, that the security officer just isn't going to do it, because many of these gentlemen don't want to take on that role at schools these days. And so I think we have to continue that conversation with increasing the pay. But I also think there are other things that we can talk about, which is including counselors and psychiatrists or psychologists within our schools, and having those personnel on staff so that we can begin to identify the at-risk children that may come back to the schools and perpetrate harm on our children.
Representative, what else needs to be done on school to keep schools safe?
I feel like it's hard to talk about this issue without acknowledging the elephant in the room, which is it's very hard to get at the root issues around school safety, because the root issue in gun violence is guns, and Texas leadership has made it incredibly difficult for us to make any progress on those issues. So we're having to figure out solutions that make sense in a state where leadership is refusing to even get close to the true root cause of horrific events like happened in Uvalde. The amount of money that was allocated in HB2 for schools to work on safety is an insulting number to our school districts and the actual needs that they face. $15,000 per campus certainly does not pay for somebody to be qualified and present on each campus. So unfortunately, the way this legislation came out, and I feel like I should actually back up and say the House version of it actually had more money. And then the bill went to the Senate, and the Senate stripped most of the money out, and it came back to the House. I voted for it when it left the House with money. I voted against it when it came back without the real money. And so our schools are facing really difficult challenges, and part of what makes this so challenging is they both need to address safety and the very real threats, and the fact that there is a certain very small number but real population that views schools as targets. And so I support the school districts in finding ways to do or to provide real security. I think we need to allocate more money for that. But the other challenge our schools have is making sure they're not then over-criminalizing their students. And this is not a small problem. Any amount of possession of cannabis concentrate is a felony in Texas. That means a vape pen that is high enough THC level or a pot brownie is a felony. And I do not want our school safety efforts to result in ruining kids' lives with a felony conviction.
All right, thank you. Next, we will move on to assessment and accountability. Accountability, of course, a very big topic among educators in this state. Our current A through F accountability system is based entirely on STAR for elementary and middle school levels. In February, the Travis County District Court will decide whether or not to allow TEA to move forward on new college career military readiness rules that will drastically impact the overall ratings of campuses and school districts. Should our accountability system be so dependent on STAR or any other standardized tests? And if the answer to that question is no, then what factors of school quality would you like to see included when we rate and assess our schools? Representative, we'll start with you.
Well, let's say the obvious. STAR is trash. And I don't mean that idly. I went through Texas public schools when it was the TOS and then the TAX and now STAR, and it's different names, same shenanigans, and we cannot demonstrate that these assessments are actually measuring student learning, and it appears that they may instead be measuring student socioeconomic status, which if we want to measure socioeconomic status, we have much more effective ways to do that than torturing our kids and our teachers with several days of Scantron tests. One thing I've worked on in particular is trying to scale our tests back to the federal minimums, because we do have to do some level of standardized testing under federal law, No Child Left Behind. Unfortunately, we've passed that legislation through the House. Unfortunately, it's been dead on arrival in the Senate. I've also worked to try and allow writing in particular to be assessed with a portfolio method instead of with a standardized test. That's something the higher education world has already moved to. You know, I had to take a standardized writing test to graduate from my university, and now higher education is moving towards this portfolio, because teaching kids to write the standardized test is actually teaching them bad formulaic writing. And news just broke in the last couple of days that TEA is allowing those to be graded pretty much entirely by AI. And if we're not going to let our kids write essays with AI, I'm not so sure AI should grade them. But it's a measure of what terrible level of writing we are teaching. So I've passed that bill to allow portfolio assessments instead through the Texas House. Again, we've still got some barriers in the Senate, but I'm going to continue working on it. And we need to work towards, there is a place for testing, but the testing needs to be used for evaluation, not for accountability. And that's the direction I'd like to see us move as a state.
All right, Mr. Pastrano, same question about STAR.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't be used for accountability purposes. You know, the STAR testing was actually born not from educational professionals and experts, but by corporate professionals and experts that have nothing to do with education. And so it's not a gauge of student accomplishment, and it's not a gauge of teacher work and teaching. There was a study, I think a day or two ago, that was released that said it was tied to socioeconomic levels, that's really what it graded, right? And so, or at least the higher grades were from people that come from some higher socioeconomic levels. And so what are the other factors, I think is the second question?
Right.
Yeah, the other factors, I think, are the teacher-student relationship. Right? The teachers know best whether or not this is a student with the capabilities to be advanced to the next grade. The teachers are best to know where this student is at. In individualized attention, again, we leave our most valuable assets for our future with our teachers, and we trust our teachers the least at the end of the day, right? We don't give them the right pay, and we don't trust them with assessing our children. And so it's that relationship that they can tell us, hey, this young guy is just a wonderful student, and he's great at doing these things, and you know, here's the path that he's on. They can tell us all these things that a Scantron and a standardized test cannot. And we continue to tie or try to tie teacher pay, school accountability, teacher accountability, to a standardized test that comes down to what they do on one day or 1 week of a school year, and it's just wrong, right? And so, no, those are some of the factors that should be applied.
Okay, I want to return to the topic of school funding. Schools have, of course, like many other areas, faced intense pressures from inflation over the past 4 years. This year, federal stimulus funding runs out for schools, and any money that is not already obligated, if whatever remaining money, if it is going to stay in schools' accounts, must already be obligated. Ms. Pastrano, we'll start with you. What are you hearing from school districts about what they are doing with their federal stimulus funds? And how are they using those funds to address the learning loss? And what do you think schools are going to do when those funds run out?
So again, I don't know that I can say that I've actually had these conversations, but I visit the schools on a regular basis, and one of the things that I see them spending some of the money on is on science and math and kind of technology type programs. And so I see that going on, and I see students being involved and completely interested. As far as where we go from here, once the money runs out, I think that we end up back in a situation where we are depending on the legislature to increase that daily allotment so that we can increase our resources for our children. And I think that fight continues on, right? And the only path forward that I've identified is what we saw, kind of the dynamics in the voucher fight. And I can repeat that whole conversation, but at the end of the day, I think that these things come down to relationships and increasing the daily allotment for our schools so that we can all benefit from teachers all the way through the students.
I see a question here.
If you're a new member in the Texas House, the first joke you hear is that the other party isn't the enemy, the Senate's the enemy. And I mention that because I'm going to tell you about a conversation I had with a state senator who's actually no longer in office. I was talking to him about the education budget in 2021, and he said, they're getting all this federal money, so we might as well give them some more strings. And this idea that because there was federal money coming in, the schools were flush, and we could give them more reporting requirements, give them more unfunded mandates since they have federal money. And so I think that's an under-acknowledged problem that our schools are facing is we have been attaching more and more requirements on our schools in the budget process that turn into headaches for our teachers that interfere with teaching. So one of the things we need to do as those ESSER monies expire is pull some of those reporting strings back that our school administrators are passing on to our teachers effectively. I have visited with school districts about how they've been spending these ESSER funds. The thing that I'm most alarmed about them losing the use of them for is social and emotional well-being. The school districts have been paying for behavioral health specialists. They've been paying for counselors with these funds. And while COVID increased the need is not decreasing fast. We need those supports in our school, and I will support legislation to make sure we fund having mental health or behavioral health professionals at every campus in the state, because that's what our students need to be successful.
All right, so we already mentioned, the kind of unspent money that had sort of been targeted for education in the recent legislative sessions. In addition to that, of course, we have the Rainy Day Fund, which has over $20 billion in it. Representative, we'll start with you this time. What are your funding priorities for public education the next time you all get together, whether that's in a regular session or a special session?
I think the number one thing we can do is increase the basic allotment. And the reason why we keep coming back to this is because the basic allotment ends up effectively lifting all boats. That impacts every single school in the state of Texas positively. And also, when we passed our school funding bill in 2019, that bill included language to say that 30% of any increase to the basic allotment has to go to educator pay. So increasing the basic allotment also effectively makes more dollars available more dollars required to go to educator pay. That's something I was actually able to protect in 2021 and put language in the budget to make sure those dollars kept flowing to our educators, and something we were able to do in the budget again this last cycle. So if we can get that money in the basic allotment, it goes across the board. Longer term, something I really think would like to see us invest more in is bilingual education. And HB1 in 2019, the school funding bill, made an effort to invest in bilingual education, two-way, dual language in particular. And we are seeing a lot of school districts that made big efforts to do those programs, including both in Hayes CISD and San Marcos CISD. But now we're seeing school districts back out of those programs because the dollars are not working the way they hoped, and they are struggling to find staffing for those programs. And so I would like us to reinvest in those programs, make them successful, because bilinguality is an incredible life skill. These two-way dual language programs are incredibly effective in helping students be successful as lifelong bilingual speakers.
All right, Mr. Pastrano, priorities for public education funding next time the legislature comes together.
There's an art about being a trial lawyer, and that is say it once and then say it again, and just in case, say it one more time. And so I'll say it, and I think that we've both said it repetitively, which is increasing the basic level. I think that takes care of increasing teacher pay. I don't know, depending on what that increase looks like, whether or not it's going to be sufficient, but it also provides resources for students. One of the areas that I think specifically probably needs additional funding, not probably, I feel very passionately about, is special education. One of the problems that my family entertained going through the public school system was testing. These days is very difficult. It is an incredible process to have a child tested for even just a potential reading disability. And we found it to be one of the most difficult processes that I've ever gone through. And I feel like I'm pretty good at explaining basic steps, trying to get through it. And then if we were waiting on a return phone call, then it felt like they were confusing us with a different family, a different child. And it was a repetitive process that we went through. And I just thought about, and so we have the ability to go to Texas Children's in Houston, which is what we ended up doing because it was such a frustrating process. But I think about, again, the families like the families that I grew up in where my parents would not have been able to afford that, and they have to depend on the public school systems. And boy, I cry for them knowing the difficulty that we went through. And so I think increasing funding for special education programs is incredibly important as well.
All right, thank you. One more topic for tonight, and that is pre-K education. During the 85th legislative session, which was in 2019, Texas took steps to increase funding for pre-K instruction and also expanded the amount of money and who qualified for that full-day pre-K classes. Texas does not yet, however, have universal pre-K system in place to provide free pre-K for all students who apply for public school education. The question is, would you support increasing funding and opening up admittance for all students to participate in full-day pre-kindergarten? If yes or no, why do you feel that way? You are first, Mr.
Yeah, without a doubt, I'd agree that that's an essential part of education is fully funding pre-K. I would start with the idea that it is the building blocks to preparing a child, to making sure a child is prepared for where he or she needs to be when it comes time to enter kindergarten. It's also an area, a time where we can begin to identify issues that may need to have special attention, and also a time that we can intervene early and assist with, again, identifying letters and those types of things, and early intervention is essential. I'll tell you my story is my son is dyslexic. We had a really difficult time identifying it, and so when we finally identified it, we were able to find a retired teacher. Many of you may know, I just know her as Miss Brown because we call it reading class, and he goes Miss Brown at Hill Country Dyslexia on Bishop. And she has now got him to a point to where he is at his grade level. And so again, it's a constant battle for parents to entrust our children to the public school systems to get them to where we need them to be and having a full education. And I believe in the pre-K system that would allow for those early intervention, early identification, and taking care of issues that may come up. And I believe in the teachers to accomplish those things as well, if they're properly funded. So,
Representative Zwiener, same question, do you support increasing funding and opening up admittance for all students to participate in full-day pre-K?
Absolutely. I agree that pre-K is an important tool for identifying potential educational challenges early. Research also shows that it's one of the great equalizers for students of low socioeconomic status, for them to have an opportunity to be in pre-K, learn some of the soft skills that help them with the more traditional reading, writing, arithmetic later on. That research is incredibly clear, and our funding, well, our income level for who we allow to attend pre-K now in Texas is still too high of a bar, and many families who need that service for their students are stuck with a lottery. Maybe they get into a tuition-based program, maybe they don't. It's also important for the economic well-being of these families and for gender equity. Childcare is incredibly expensive, and that's if you can find it. It is incredibly difficult to find placements for young children right now. And so there are a lot of parents, mostly women, who would like to be back in the workforce and cannot return to the workforce without a free option for childcare. And so we should absolutely invest in universal pre-K so that every single kid can show up in kindergarten with those soft skills that they need to be successful, and so that more parents are free to re-enter the workforce if that's what they want.
All right, thank you for that. That concludes our forum questions. We will now move on to our final 2-minute closing remarks. Mr. Pastrano, you went second on the opening remarks, so you will go first on this one. So 2 minutes to wrap things up here.
Look, I'm incredibly dedicated to the public school system. Without the teachers in our public school system, I wouldn't be where I am today. My family is incredibly grateful for the San Marcos School District and the Hayes School District and all the teachers that led us to where we're at now, and all the administrators and the close relationships that we built. And so our dedication is incredible, and that's the reason why we go back now and how we take time and money from our own pocket to do what we can to affect our teachers in a positive way. We'll continue to do that. One of the things that we've talked about since early on is the base pay for a state representative is somewhere in the range of $7,200 a year. The state of Texas was set up in a way that people who come from homes like I came from, it is prohibitive for folks like me to be able to be a state representative because it's just not possible to sustain based on that pay. I've realized that I'm in an incredibly blessed position these days, and it's all because of public educators. And so one of the commitments that we've made early on is that we would take that $7,200 base pay, and whatever's left after they take taxes and all that stuff, we would then find ways to reinvest that money into benefiting our teachers. And so that would be roughly about $5,000. And so our thought is somewhere between $500 to $1,000 that we would be able to reinvest that into each classroom at the beginning of each year. There are teachers who are looking for money for supplies, different resources. And so that's one way that we can make an instant difference in District 45. And that's one of the commitments that we want to keep.
Thank you, Representative Zwiener.
Once they take the health insurance out, you write them a check back. I am so proud of the work I've done on public education and that I'm determined to continue doing. There's this narrative out there right now that our schools just need to get back to the basics, teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we know our schools are so much bigger than that. Our schools are the most democratizing institution we have that give every single Texan, or they should give every single Texan, a fair shot. And they're a place where we don't get to pick who we're next to. They're a place where we have to build relationships with people who are not necessarily the people we choose. And that's a beautiful thing. That's something we need in America. I have fought hard to try and protect our teachers' pay, fought hard to defeat vouchers, fought hard to keep the culture war out of our schools. A couple of the things I'm proud of on that specifically is Last session, I sat on the House floor with a point of order and a tool under our House rules to make sure that Don't Say Gay, that terrible law from Florida, didn't become the law of the land in Texas. I also was in charge of helping build the legal case against HB 900, the book banning bill, that brought by an author who was demonizing our school librarians. We built that legal case, and the Fifth Circuit overturned the operative part of that bill this January. That's the work we need to keep doing to make sure we defend our public schools and get the investments we need and get all Texans to buy back into this incredible institution that's so critical. It's been in our state constitution from day one. So that's my commitment to you, to help rebuild Texans' confidence and support for our public school system.
All right, thank you. We will have some closing remarks here in a second, but first of all, I think just thank you to both candidates. Let's give them an applause for. And then I'll hand it back off to Mario to wrap us up.
And thank you to Matthew for serving as our moderator tonight. Can we give him a round of applause? Your expertise really brought an extra something to this event, so thank you so much for being here with us. I would also like to take a moment to say thank you to our candidates for joining us. We know that you guys have very busy schedules, but having these conversations about public education matter. So with that said, I want to remind you guys that every legislative session is a public education session. You can, your vote matters, and we show that it matters by setting that vote as a priority. I want to show tremendous gratitude to our volunteers who help make this possible. If I can have my couple volunteers stand up, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you to my colleagues as well for providing support. And then finally, I invite everybody to take out their phones, and I'll give you a second to be able to do that. Because education is so important, we want to make sure that you guys are up to date with all the information. You can sign up to get involved with Raise Your Hand Texas by sending the message "Raise My Hand" to the number 40649. And as you guys are leaving the room in a little bit, make sure you take a bunch of swag with you. We also have signs that you can put out in your yard that say, I support public education and I vote. And then just a couple last reminders. The last day to apply for voting by mail is February 23rd. Early voting is from February 20th to March 1st. And of course, primary day is March 5th. With that brings the end to the conclusion to the evening. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.